Hey, welcome to Agnes Thompson's channel. My name's Helen, and I'm going to share my story with you.
67 is an age when you start to appreciate predictability. Not the boring routine that makes you grit your teeth in your 30s, but a calm, measured predictability, like a well-tuned piano. Each key is a day of the week, each chord a familiar task. Monday is for volunteering at the Durham Public Library, where I teach teenagers the basics of financial literacy. They look at me, a gray-haired woman in a neat cardigan, with polite disbelief until I start explaining compound interest using their favorite video games as an example. Then, a spark of understanding ignites in their eyes, and I feel that my 37 years of experience as a financial planner haven't turned to dust along with my retirement papers. Tuesdays and Thursdays are for the garden. My small plot behind the house in North Carolina isn't just a hobby, it's my manifesto. In a world where vegetables are grown in sterile labs, my tomatoes smell of sunshine, and my basil smells of an Italian vacation my late husband, Tom, and I never quite saved up for. Every seedling, every garden bed, is an asset in my portfolio of peace of mind. Tom would have laughed at that phrasing, but he would have understood. He always did. It's been 5 years since he's been gone, but his laughter still lives in the rustle of the old oak tree in the backyard. Wednesday is for bills and checking on my investments. I spread the papers out on the large oak table Tom and I bought at our first estate sale after we got married. Medicare, utilities, dividends from stocks I chose with the same care I used to select seeds for my garden. I'm not wealthy, but I am independent. That independence is my fortress, built from decades of discipline, saving, and foresight. I learned to read the fine print in contracts and in people's intentions. Or so I thought. Friday was always Grandkids Day. Lily, my 8-year-old star with eyes the color of a stormy sky, and Leo, a 5-year-old hurricane with an endless supply of energy. They would burst into my quiet, orderly world like a welcome spring thunderstorm, washing away the dust of loneliness. We baked apple pies from my grandmother's recipe, built pillow forts that could withstand a siege from an entire army, and read books snuggled under a blanket on the old couch. But our most important ritual was the photo albums. I am the keeper of our family's history, captured in faded photographs. In thick, embossed albums, generations of our family lived. A great-grandfather in his World War I uniform, a grandmother in front of her first car, me with a huge bow at my high school graduation, Tom awkwardly hugging me on our first date. I told Lily and Leo the stories behind these pictures. Not dry facts, but living tales of love, loss, small victories, and big dreams. I wanted them to know their roots, to feel they were part of something bigger than just a family of 4 in a trendy townhouse. I believed this knowledge would be their anchor in any of life's storms. Lily adored these stories. She could spend hours looking at the black and white photos, asking hundreds of questions. Leo preferred the funny pictures, where his father, Mark, or I were little. He would laugh uproariously, pointing a finger at an image of his serious dad with a ridiculous cowlick. In those moments, my house was filled with purpose. All my hard work, all my foresight was for this, for my grandchildren's laughter, for the spark of curiosity in their eyes. But lately, something had changed. The change crept in quietly, like the evening chill at the end of summer. At first, it was small things. Jessica, my son Mark's wife, started talking more about modern parenting methods. She read blogs by some progressive psychologists and enthusiastically recounted their theories. According to one, an excessive focus on the past traumatizes a child's psyche, preventing them from focusing on the future. One Friday, I pulled out a new album I had started for Lily, with pictures from her babyhood. Jessica gently but firmly stopped me. "Mom, let's skip that today," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kids have their educational app scheduled on the tablet. It syncs with their school curriculum. I looked at Lily and Leo, who were already on the couch, their faces buried in glowing screens. Their expressions were blank, their fingers swiping quickly across the glass. The room was filled with a silence punctuated only by the beeps from the speakers. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I was used to. It was the silence of alienation. Mark stood nearby, staring out the window. He always stared out the window when he was uncomfortable. I tried to be flexible. I understood the world had changed. I even downloaded a few games onto my old iPad to be with it. But I couldn't give up on what I felt was truly important. I saw how Mark and Jessica spent money. A new SUV, though the old one was only 3 years old. Designer furniture on credit. Vacations to trendy resorts, photos of which immediately appeared on Jessica's social media. She was a micro-influencer of sorts, sharing her perfect life with a few thousand followers. As a professional financial planner, I saw the warning signs. They were living beyond their means, building their house of cards on a foundation of consumer debt. I knew that one wrong step, a job loss, an illness, and it would all come crashing down. But what worried me most was Lily and Leo's future. They had no college savings accounts. I spent a week putting together what I thought was the perfect proposal. I researched all the available 529 plans, tax-advantaged savings accounts for education. I developed a strategy to accumulate a substantial sum by the time Lily and Leo came of age, with minimal monthly contributions invested in conservative but reliable index funds. I was even prepared to make the initial deposit, a significant one, from my own savings. It was my gift. Not just money, but the gift of security. The gift of a future. The next Friday, I arrived at their house with a neat folder in my hands. It contained charts, calculations, and comparison tables. I felt as if I were walking into a meeting with an important client again. I waited until the children were in bed and sat down across from Mark and Jessica in their perfectly white, minimalist living room. There wasn't a single family photo, only abstract posters in thin black frames. I began my presentation. I spoke calmly, professionally, avoiding a preachy tone. I talked about the future, about the opportunities an education would give their children. Mark listened attentively, nodding. I could see my words were resonating with him. But Jessica sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask. When I finished and pushed the folder toward them, she didn't even glance at it. "Helen, we appreciate your concern," she said in a flat, cold tone. "But we've already figured it out. We're using a modern investment app. It's managed by AI, analyzes the market in real time. It's much more effective than your old-fashioned methods." "Jess, but Mom's a professional," Mark interjected cautiously. "Maybe we should at least take a look?" "Mark, we've been over this," she snapped, not looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on me. "We are responsible for our children's financial future. And we don't want them to feel indebted to you. It creates an unhealthy dynamic." An unhealthy dynamic. The words hit me like a slap. My desire to help, to secure my grandchildren's future, was labeled an unhealthy dynamic. I looked at my son for support, but he was staring out the window again. His reflection in the perfectly clean glass showed a small, hunched woman holding a useless folder. After that, the Friday visit stopped. At first, there were polite excuses. "Lily has a bit of a cold, better for her to rest." "Leo has a friend's birthday party, they're going to a trampoline park." We decided to have a family-only weekend. Each text came from Mark's phone, but I recognized Jessica's style, curt, businesslike, leaving no room for argument. I tried calling. Mark wouldn't pick up. He'd call back later, speaking quickly, disjointedly, promising that next week for sure. But next week never came. I sent gifts. The courier left them at the door, and I never even got a simple "thank you." My house, once filled with laughter, sank into a silence so thick and heavy you could almost touch it. I walked from room to room, and every object reminded me of the grandkids. A scratch on the table leg, that was Leo crashing his toy truck into it. A small jam stain on the couch cushion I never bothered to remove, a memory of my last tea party with Lily. I started keeping a calendar. Not for planning, but for documenting the emptiness. In every square that should have been marked Lily and Leo, I drew a red X. I logged every attempt to make contact. 2:30 p.m., called Mark, no answer. 4 p.m., texted to ask how the kids are. Read, no reply. I did it methodically, almost automatically. The old financial planner in me demanded that I document the losses. And the losses were colossal. I was losing the most precious thing I had. This went on for 2 months. 2 months of red X's on the calendar. 2 months of silence. My hope dwindled with each passing day, replaced by a cold, sticky fear. What had I done wrong? Was my concern overbearing? Was my love suffocating? I replayed every conversation, every action, searching for my mistake. One Friday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I baked their favorite apple pie, the aroma filling the empty house and making the loneliness almost unbearable. I put it in a basket, got in my car, and drove to their house. I wasn't planning to make a scene. I just wanted to see them, even for a minute. I parked across the street. The lights were on in their windows. I could see their silhouettes. Mark, Jessica, 2 children. A perfect family in a perfect house. I sat in the car for almost an hour, unable to bring myself to get out. The pie was getting cold on the passenger seat. Finally, I picked up my phone. My fingers trembled as I typed a message to Mark. I'm nearby. I brought a pie. Can I just give the kids a hug and leave? The reply came almost instantly. But it wasn't from Mark. I knew from the finality of the tone. Helen, we asked you not to come over. You're violating our boundaries. We think it's best for everyone if we cease all contact for a while. Please do not text or call us. We will reach out when we are ready. I reread the message several times. The words blurred before my eyes. Cease all contact. This wasn't just a rejection. It was an exile. A sentence handed down without a trial. I sat in the darkness of my car, staring at the glowing windows of their house. My family was inside. My blood. And I was out here in the cold. An outsider. Unwanted. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a war. A quiet, polite, modern war, where the weapons were text messages and the battlefield was my grandchildren's hearts. And I had just lost the first, most important battle. But someone who has spent 37 years crafting long-term strategies knows that one battle is not the entire war. I started the engine. The pie remained on the seat. The whole way home, a single thought hammered in my head, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. They say I'm not needed. We'll see about that. It's time to bring the receipts. The first 48 hours after that text message were a blur. Not a blur of grief or tears, but a cold, ringing vacuum of shock. My house, my fortress of predictability, had become a torture chamber of silence. Each tick of the wall clock measured not seconds, but hammer blows to my soul. I mechanically watered the plants, wiped non-existent dust, rearranged books. My body moved along its learned trajectory, but my mind was paralyzed. The words "cease all contact" were branded onto my consciousness. It wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. It was an execution performed with surgical precision via a smartphone screen. On Sunday morning, I woke before dawn. The fog began to lift, and in its place, a cold, focused anger crystallized. Not a hysterical, screaming rage, but a rage like the blue flame of an acetylene torch, capable of cutting through steel. The grief hadn't disappeared. It had just compressed into a tight, heavy knot in my chest, becoming fuel for this new, icy fire. I went to my oak table, turned on my laptop, and created a new folder. I didn't name it Family or Mark. I named it Project 732. 732 was the number of the house where my grandchildren lived. For me, it was no longer my son's home. It was an objective. The first thing I did was screenshot that text message and all the previous polite refusals. I saved them to the folder, naming each file with the date and time. Then I took out my calendar with the red X's. I photographed every month, every week, every day of my documented exile. These were my first receipts, the first entries in a case where the defendant was my own family. Emotion was an unaffordable luxury. What was required now was analysis. A strategy. The woman who mourned the loss of her grandchildren gave way to the financial planner analyzing a hostile takeover of the most valuable asset in her life. For the next few weeks, I turned my life into a research project. The Durham Library, where I used to teach teenagers, became my headquarters. But now I sit not in the conference room, but in a quiet corner of the legal section. I immersed myself in the laws of North Carolina regarding grandparents' rights. Words that had once seemed abstract took on flesh and blood, substantial relationship, harm to the child, parental alienation. That last term struck me the most. It was exactly what was happening. Jessica wasn't just pushing me away, she was systematically building a wall, brick by brick, using my son as her compliant mason. I read legal precedents, studied the stories of other grandparents on online forums. Their accounts were filled with pain and despair. Many gave up, broken against the wall of a legal system that defaults to protecting parental rights. But some won. And all the winners had one thing in common. They didn't give in to emotion. They presented facts. Dates, times, witnesses, documents. They turned their pain into irrefutable evidence. I realized my calendar of exes was just the beginning. I needed more. I needed an army of facts. I began compiling a detailed timeline. Not just of the last few months, but of the last few years. I dug up old emails, photos, even credit card statements to reconstruct the picture. Here was a receipt from the cafe where Lily and I had ice cream every Friday. Here was a ticket to the children's museum I took them to last year. Here was an order from an online store for Christmas gifts I had spent 3 weeks choosing. Each document was proof of our bond, the substantial relationship the law spoke of. I worked with the methodical precision of an archivist, cataloging my own life, turning warm memories into cold evidence. One of the key elements in alienation cases, I learned, was the testimony of neutral witnesses. People who had seen me with my grandchildren and could confirm that our relationship was warm and loving. My analyst's brain immediately drew up a list. At the top was Mrs. Gable, my next-door neighbor. An energetic woman in her 70s who spent most of her day tending to her roses and saw everything that happened on our quiet street. One sunny Tuesday, I baked a lemon loaf and went over to her house. We sat on her porch, drinking iced tea and talking about the weather, gardening, and our aching backs. I didn't get straight to the point. I knew a direct question might scare her. Instead, I started reminiscing. "You know, Evelyn," I said, looking at the empty swing set in my yard, "I miss the noise so much. Remember how Leo used to run across my lawn, pretending to be an airplane? I was always afraid he'd crash into your prize-winning roses." Evelyn smiled. "Oh, I remember. Such a little rascal. And Lily a real lady. Always so polite. They're wonderful children, Helen. I haven't seen them in a while, by the way. Is everything all right?" This was my opening. To be honest, not really. I allowed a note of sadness into my voice. The young people have their own ideas about life these days. It seems I've become an inconvenience. I saw the sympathy in her face. We talked for another hour. I didn't ask for anything. I just shared my pain, and she listened and nodded, recalling more and more details of my time with the grandkids. When I got home, I immediately opened my Project 732 file and transcribed our conversation verbatim, noting the date and time. Mrs. Gable had become my first, unsuspecting witness. Next on the list was Amelia, the young librarian who ran the story time circle and adored Lily. I scheduled my conversation with her for the following Monday. The most painful and yet most productive source of information was Jessica's social media profile. I had never been interested in such things, considering them a waste of time. But now, her page was my window into the world from which I had been exiled. I created an anonymous profile with a fictional name and a neutral photo of a landscape. I called myself Susan Green. Susan was a quiet, unremarkable woman who just liked looking at pretty pictures. And there were many pictures. Jessica posted several times a day. Here they were as a family at a new restaurant that had just opened downtown. Lily and Leo sat with tablets while their parents took selfies. Here was Jessica promoting some organic, children's clothing brand, with Lily dressed in an expensive dress that made her look unnaturally grown up. Here they were on a spontaneous, weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin that, as I found out with a 5-minute Google search, cost $1,500 a night. I looked at these photos and my heart ached. I saw smiles, but I didn't see joy. I saw my grandchildren turned into props for their mother's glossy online life. But I forced myself to shut off my emotions. I was Susan Green, the analyst. I took a screenshot of every post. I saved every photo, every caption, every hashtag. I created a separate spreadsheet where I entered all their major expenses that could be tracked through the posts. The new SUV, Jessica's designer handbag, expensive gadgets. I felt like a dirty spy, digging through someone else's life. But it wasn't someone else's life. It was a life built on a lie, and my grandchildren were its hostages. That thought gave me strength. A month had passed since the start of Project 732. The folder on my laptop had grown to several gigabytes. I had a timeline, witness statements, a financial analysis based on public data. I knew I had reached the limit of what I could do alone. I needed a professional. I needed a lawyer. I approached the selection with the same meticulousness I used when choosing stocks for my portfolio. I wasn't looking for the most expensive or the most aggressive. I was looking for a strategist. After a week of researching law firms in Durham and reading reviews, I settled on Sarah Jenkins. She was in her early 40s, specialized in complex family law cases, and client testimonials consistently mentioned her calm demeanor, methodical approach, and empathy. Our first meeting was in her downtown office. It was a modern building of glass and steel, but her office was surprisingly cozy, with soft armchairs and shelves filled not only with legal tomes, but also with regular books. Sarah was a tall, elegant woman with intelligent, perceptive eyes. She didn't rush me. She just listened. I spoke for almost an hour. I told her everything from the very beginning. I tried to stick to the facts, but my voice broke several times. When I finished, I placed a printed copy of my calendar on her desk. Then I opened my laptop and showed her the Project 732 folder. I watched her expression change as she scrolled through the files, from polite sympathy to professional interest, and then to genuine astonishment. "Mrs. Summers." "Helen," she said, finally looking up from the screen. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I have never had a client come in with this level of preparation. This is incredible." She warned me it would be hard. That courts are reluctant to interfere with parental decisions. That proving alienation is one of the most difficult tasks in family law. They will do everything to portray you as intrusive, unstable, even crazy, Sarah said, looking me straight in the eye. "Are you ready for that?" I looked at the photo of Lily and Leo that was my laptop's wallpaper. "I'm ready for anything," I replied. The first step Sarah advised was to attempt mediation. It was a mandatory procedure before filing a lawsuit. An olive branch, as she called it. Though we both knew that this branch would likely be broken and thrown back in our faces. But we had to do it. A refusal to mediate could be interpreted by the court as my unwillingness to compromise. The meeting took place in a neutral office, in a room with bland furniture and a box of cheap tissues on the table. I came with Sarah. Mark and Jessica came with their lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit. Mark wouldn't look at me. He sat hunched in his chair, studying the pattern on the carpet. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to remain cold. Jessica, on the other hand, was full of energy. She spoke at length and with confidence, using phrases memorized from pop psychology blogs. She talked about the toxic patterns I had supposedly imposed on their family, about my controlling behavior, about the need to protect the children's emotional well-being from my outdated influence. My offer to set up a college savings fund was presented as an attempt to buy love and undermine their parental authority. I listened to this stream of lies, and my blood ran cold. She had taken our shared memories, our family traditions, my love, and twisted it all, turning it into a weapon against me. When the mediator gave me the floor, I spoke calmly. I didn't make excuses. I simply stated the facts. I talked about Fridays, about pies, about photo albums. I talked about my numerous attempts to contact them, which went unanswered. "I just want to see my grandchildren," I finished. "We will reach out when we are ready," Jessica retorted, repeating the exact phrase from the text message. Mediation failed. When Sarah and I left the building, I felt empty. It was more painful than I had expected. To see my sons so broken and weak. To hear my life and my intentions being methodically destroyed. "This was necessary," Sarah said gently. "Now we have an official document confirming their unwillingness to engage. It's another receipt for our collection." After the failed mediation, the wall grew even higher. Jessica moved from passive defense to active offense. A week later, Amelia from the library called me. She was very embarrassed. She told me that Jessica had sent an official letter to the library, forbidding me from any contact with Lily during my volunteer hours. Moreover, she had filed a complaint with the director, claiming I was using my position to harass the children. It was a blow below the belt. My volunteer work, my small sanctuary, had been poisoned. The library director, fortunately, had known me for years and was skeptical of the complaint, but the very fact of its existence was humiliating. And then I found out that Jessica had started spreading rumors about me among our mutual acquaintances and distant relatives. That I was not right in the head after Tom's death. That I had become obsessive and unpredictable. She was creating the image of a crazy old woman to discredit any actions I might take in advance. The tension mounted with each passing day. I felt the circle of isolation tightening around me. They weren't just trying to cut me off from the grandkids. They were trying to erase me from their lives, from the lives of everyone who knew me. The evening after Amelia's call, I sat at my desk, surrounded by documents. The calendar, screenshots, bank statements, the mediator's report, a copy of Jessica's complaint. This was the map of my war. Every piece of paper was a captured position, every number a round in the chamber. The pain hadn't gone away. The fear hadn't gone away. But now they had a purpose. Sarah had suggested hiring a private investigator to gather more information about their financial situation, to prove that their lifestyle was a fiction. But I refused. It was too much. I couldn't turn this into a dirty surveillance operation. I had to use what I did best. Analysis. I opened my spreadsheet of their expenses based on Jessica's posts. I started cross-referencing them with publicly available data. Real estate purchase records, vehicle registrations, property tax assessments. I began to build a financial model of their family. And the deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. Their house of cards was trembling in the slightest breeze. And I, with my offer of help, with my knowledge of their true situation, had become a mortal threat to Jessica. I wasn't just an overbearing mother-in-law. I was the mirror in which she saw her own lies. And she had decided to shatter that mirror. I worked through the night. Coffee and cold fury kept me awake. At dawn, I leaned back in my chair. Before me lay a completed strategy. A plan based not on emotions, but on numbers and facts. It was my only path forward. A path through a courtroom. It would be long, agonizing, and victory was not guaranteed. But it was the only chance I had to get my grandchildren back. I looked at their photo on the wall. 2 smiling faces I hadn't seen in almost 4 months. The pain pierced me with new force, but it didn't break me. It made me harder than steel. Even when it felt like all was lost, I did not give up. The night before the court date was the longest of my life. Sleep wouldn't come. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold chamomile tea, staring into the dark window that reflected a lonely, gray-haired woman. Nearly 6 months had passed since that evening I sat in my car with a cold apple pie. 6 months of silence, broken only by the clicking of my keyboard and the rustle of papers. My Project 732 had grown into a hefty binder that lay on the table like a sleeping predator. It contained all my pain, all my anger, all my love, translated into the dry language of facts. I wasn't afraid. Fear had burned out weeks ago, leaving only cold determination in its wake. But I felt an incredible exhaustion. This battle had drained me. I had lost weight, and dark circles had taken up permanent residence under my eyes, impossible to hide with makeup. Sometimes, looking in the mirror, I saw a ghost of the vibrant woman I had been just 6 months before. But then I would look at the photo of Lily and Leo on the wall, and the steel would return to my spine. I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing this for them. Sarah called me in the evening. Her voice was calm and confident, as always. We went over the key points of our strategy one last time. Remember, Helen, she said before hanging up, tomorrow, you are not a victim. You are the plaintiff. You are not there to ask, but to demand. Just tell the truth. Your documents will do the rest. Her words became my mantra. I am not a victim. I am the plaintiff. I brought receipts. The Durham County courtroom was exactly as I had imagined it, tall, cold, and impersonal. The dark wood-paneled walls seemed to have absorbed decades of human tragedies. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and unfulfilled hopes. Sarah and I sat at the plaintiff's table. A few minutes later, they walked in. Mark, Jessica, and their lawyer. I hadn't seen my son in 6 months. My heart skipped a beat. He was pale and thin, a shadow of his former self. His expensive suit hung on him like a coat on a hanger. He never once looked in my direction, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Jessica, in contrast, was the picture of righteous indignation. She wore a severe but elegant dress, her hair perfectly styled. She sat up straight, her arms crossed, and looked at me with an expression of cold contempt. She wasn't playing a role. She genuinely believed she was the injured party, protecting her family from my toxic influence. In her world, built on likes and pretty pictures, any truth that didn't fit her narrative was a lie. The judge, Mr. Harrison, was an older African-American man with tired but perceptive eyes. He spoke softly, but every word carried weight. When the session began, I felt an icy calm spread through my veins. I was ready. Jessica's lawyer, Mr. Davenport, went first. He was a master of his craft. He painted a portrait of me in vivid, poisonous colors. He spoke of my obsessive behavior, my unsolicited financial advice, which was nothing more than an attempt to establish control over the young family. He presented the court with a copy of the complaint Jessica had filed with the library as proof of my harassment. He called witnesses. My cousin, whom I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. She mumbled something about how I had always been a bit off after Tom's death. A family friend who confirmed that Jessica had complained to him about my suffocating attention. Every word was like the crack of a whip. They took kernels of truth, my grief, my concern, and wove them into a web of lies. Davenport paced the courtroom, gesturing and raising his voice at all the right moments. He spoke of the sacred right of parents to raise their children as they see fit, without outside interference. He portrayed me as a capricious, lonely old woman who couldn't accept that her son had grown up and started his own family. When he finished his speech, a heavy silence hung in the room. I looked at the judge. His face was unreadable. For a moment, I thought all was lost. That they had won. "Miss Jenkins, you may proceed," Judge Harrison said. Sarah stood up. She didn't pace. She walked to her table and picked up the first binder. Her voice was even and calm, devoid of any theatrics. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not here to dispute the right of parents to raise their children. We are here because that right has been used as a weapon to cause harm not only to my client, but to the children themselves by severing vital family bonds." And she began to present my receipts. One by one. Methodically. Relentlessly. First was my calendar. Sarah projected an enlarged image onto the screen. Here are 6 months of Mrs. Summers's life. Each red X is a blocked visit. Each note is a call or a text message that went unanswered. Next, the screenshots of the text messages appeared on the screen. The climax was the final one. "We think it's best for everyone if we cease all contact for a while." Sarah called Mrs. Gable to the stand. My neighbor, a little nervous, testified about what a loving and involved grandmother I was. "I saw them almost every week," she said. Laughter, games on the lawn. And then it all stopped. Just silence. Then Amelia from the library testified. She indignantly refuted the accusations of harassment, describing how Lily would always run to greet me, how they would read books together after her story time sessions. And finally, Sarah did something Mr. Davenport had clearly not anticipated. She didn't present my financial analysis as an accusation. She presented it as an explanation of motive. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Davenport claims my client tried to control her son's family with money." But the facts tell a different story. Graphs appeared on the screen. Not my detailed calculations, but simple, clear infographics showing the gap between Mark and Jessica's public lifestyle and their actual financial reality, based on publicly available data. Mrs. Summers, as a professional financial planner, saw the danger. Her offer was not an act of control, but an act of desperate concern. And it was this concern, this truth, that became a threat to Mrs. Markham, whose public image of success was at risk of being exposed. The alienation didn't begin out of concern for the children. It began out of fear of the truth. There was dead silence in the courtroom. Jessica was as white as a sheet. Davenport had lost all his swagger. Judge Harrison looked at the screen for a long time, then at Jessica, then at me. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Markham," he said, addressing Jessica. His voice was quiet, but held a note of steel. "You came in here and told this court that your husband's mother was not needed by you or your children. You called her toxic, intrusive, and even unstable." He paused, put his glasses back on, and picked up one of my printouts. "And he nodded in my direction, brought receipts, documents, witnesses, facts. She has documented every single day she was denied the right to be a grandmother. She has provided evidence of a deep and substantial bond that you attempted to sever unilaterally." He looked at Mark. "And you, sir, stood by and watched it happen. You let it happen." Mark flinched as if struck, and finally, he looked up at me. His eyes were filled with tears. The verdict was delivered. The court ordered the immediate resumption of my visits with my grandchildren. At first, supervised by a family therapist twice a week. The court also imposed sanctions on Mark and Jessica for parental alienation and ordered them to attend family counseling. When the judge left, I just sat there, unable to move. I had won, but I felt no triumph. Only a vast, all-consuming relief, mixed with bitterness. I had won the battle, but at what cost? The first few sessions at the therapist's office were agonizing. Lily and Leo were quiet and wary. They looked at me as if I were a stranger. I could see the reflection of the lies they had been told about me in their eyes. I didn't push. I was just there. I brought the books we used to love and read them aloud, even if they weren't listening. I told stories about a little boy named Mark who was afraid of thunderstorms and his mom who sat with him all night. The breakthrough came during the fourth session. I had brought an old, worn-out photo album. I opened it to a page with a picture of a little Mark in a ridiculous pumpkin costume for Halloween. Leo, who had been sitting in a corner, came closer. "Is that Daddy?" he asked quietly. "Yes, that's your daddy," I smiled. He poked the picture with his finger and laughed. The same full-throated laugh I had feared I would never hear again. Lily came over too. That day, for the first time in months, we were together again. We looked at the photos, and the ice began to melt. Mark came to the next session alone. Jessica had refused. He sat across from me and was silent for a long time. And then he broke down. He told me everything. About the debts. About the pressure from Jessica, who was desperately trying to live up to the image she had created online. About how the investment app she was so proud of turned out to be a cryptocurrency pyramid scheme where they had lost almost all their savings. They were on the verge of losing their house. He talked and I listened. I saw not a traitor before me, but my son, a lost, frightened boy in a grown man's body. When he finished, I opened my purse. But I didn't pull out a tissue. I pulled out another folder. The one I had labeled Plan B. "I suspected as much, Mark," I said quietly. Some of the details in her posts, the mention of certain online gurus, it all pointed to a classic scheme. I placed the folder on the table in front of him. It wasn't a plan to save their marriage. It was a plan to save their future. A detailed strategy for debt restructuring. An analysis of the options under Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which would allow them to keep their house. A list of contacts for reputable, non-profit credit counselors. Everything I had done for my clients for 37 years. Mark looked at the folder, then at me. There was something more than just gratitude in his eyes. It was understanding. He finally understood that my wisdom, my experience, which Jessica had called outdated, was not a threat. It was their lifeline. My love wasn't in apple pies and photo albums. It was in foresight. In the ability to see a storm long before it hits. That day, I realized that true justice isn't a court's decision. The court only gave me back the ability to see my grandchildren. True justice is the opportunity to use your wisdom to heal the wounds this war has inflicted. That was my ultimate receipt. Several more months passed. The road to healing was long and difficult, but we walked it together. Last Friday, Lily and Leo came to my house again. We baked a pie, and there was flour everywhere. And then Lily went to the bookshelf, pulled out the thickest photo album, and said, "Grandma, tell us a story. The one about great-grandpa and his funny car." I sat down in my old armchair, the grandkids snuggled up beside me, and I began to tell the story. And in that moment, the silence in my house was finally over. It was replaced by the voices of those I loved. And I knew that I had won more than just a court case. I had won back our future.